Good. All right, well, welcome back, actually, everybody, to the next installment of Alcoholism 101. I'm glad everybody came out. This is going to be, I think, one of the more interesting classes in the whole repertoire because there's so many dimensions to whiskey, and I rarely get to touch on it this much. And it does have a place in cocktails, in a rum by bars such as ours. And as you can see, there's a lot of parallels where it can kind of slot into substitute. Just a really fun topic. Everyone cool without the mask? Right. No one can hear me with the thing off, so with it on, it's probably even a bigger issue. All right, so first things first. Your welcome cocktail tonight is the bourbon special. This was featured at Stephen Crane's Tiki chain, which I think there were 6-7 locations, one of which was in Cleveland. We have an artifact from the front of the Tiki right around the corner. This was actually one of their featured drinks. When it comes down to it, it's actually kind of like a dressed up whiskey and ginger, but those additional elements really kind of make it pop. Really good drink. And one thing you're going to kind of see tonight, if you look at those recipes I handed out, there are a lot of parallels on some of those ingredients, and I think that it just shows you the interplay, how they really work well with whiskey. And number two, if you actually decided to make these at home, you wouldn't have to go crazy looking for 30 different ingredients. So, but anyway, tonight we are making this with our special Veterans Day featured bourbon, which is Hotel Tango. We'll be trying to arrive there. I really dig their new bottle design. Actually made to look like K rations. When I first saw it, I thought it was designed to look like a Claymore, which I thought was kind of badass. You might want to recommend that.
Anyway, I'll round up the tape.
And later on, our friend Kyle Heidelberg is going to talk about these in a little more detail. Before I forget, an important thing to share with you about Hotel Tango is they are literally next door to the Inferno Room in Indianapolis. So if you ever do a road trip to the Inferno Room, get your Tiki on, just slide in a little time, go next door. I'm pretty confident they're using their spirits at the Inferno Room, but anyway, next door, you really have no excuse. And all combat have All right, so the one thing that is going to cascade across all the spirits we talked about tonight is they have to be made with grains. So there's a variety of grains you can pick from. These four up here are really the core that we are talking about. So barley, corn, rye, and wheat. You will see some more rarefied grains like millet, spelt, some of those weirder things. But they're kind of interspersed, and it all depends on what you're making. That will kind of dictate what you choose as your base grains. A lot of these different styles will dictate if you have to use a certain amount of specific grain to call it the spirit that we're talking about. And what these will all ultimately comprise is what they call a mash bill. So even if you're doing a rye with 100% rye, you say, what's your mash bill? It's 100% rye. But usually it will be a proportion of different grains blended. So yeah, actually the outfit that kind of dictates what these different spirits are called is the TTB. I think it was previously the Tobacco Firearms or something. Now it's just like Trade Bureau or something.
ATF.
Yes.
ATF.
Yeah. So, oddly, they have all of that jurisdiction over what is called what and whether you actually meet those requirements to call your spirit what it is. One quick thing to also mention is some of these can also include malt, which is barley that's been partially germinated to release its fermentable sugars. So they'll kind of dampen it, break it over like a big malting floor, and that just kind of gives it a release of flavor that the other grains wouldn't have. Basically, you're going to have to crack the grains or mill them down, depending on what it is. And that's really your first kind of early stages in the preparation. So basically, you're going to pick your mash bill, get that grain blend together, and then you will put those milled grains together in a mash tun. So basically, that's where everything is blended with hot water, and it hits those flavors and sugars into the water, and that's what you initially will combine with yeast. It will ferment to, I don't know, 12–14%, depending on what you are making.
Is that actually beer at that moment?
Good question. That is what you would call a distiller's beer. So imagine beer without the hops. It's basically what it is. So very, malty, sweet smelling. So once that hits a certain percentage, you distill that product. In other words, evaporate off the water, and concentrate those alcohol vapors, capture them again by cooling them down. You will have several stages of that more often than not. And then unless you're going to make like an unaged whiskey, which is usually pretty rough on flavor or heat, you will probably put that into a barrel. And we're going to see that the barrel you use is kind of dictated by what kind of whiskey you're making. So once that aging process is done, that's when you go from bottle to glass, and a happy place for it tonight. So, yeah. So there are a couple of kind of stills you can use for these processes. The kind of old school nerdy way would be using a pot still. If you see these big, beautiful distilleries in Scotland, you'll see these huge copper vats here, what they call the swan's neck. It's just gorgeous. And then, so those are basically, since they're older school, more labor intensive, you actually get a little bit more what they call flavor esters out of those. You can get good spirits out of other types of stills too. Your other type is what they call actually column stills or coffee stills, spelled just like any connection. You go on 23andMe and go back and find out.
Yeah, we should pretend, right? Yes,
Yeah,
of course. Those are our ancestors.
So the ones here are pretty old school. They're all copper. Typically, copper is going to give you a better flavor in the end. You can use stainless steel, which is, just kind of lets you do more spirits in it, but it doesn't produce as good of a spirit. That's the problem with copper. It will just kind of absorb the flavor of what you're baking. It kind of limits what you can do. So the column stills do let you go more quickly. It's less of a batch processing. It lets you get things done more quickly. And it can produce just as good as
What is an ester?
It's basically like the flavor component that comes about in that distillation process. So the spirit will have these flavor components that you kind of want to capture. It's kind of weird to explain. But yeah, for some reason, copper lets you capture those better. Yeah. So the early history of spirit actually was kind of neck and neck with Ireland and Scotland. So technically Scotland was doing it first. That was like the first recorded instance of people making what became commercial whiskey eventually. The actual first commercial enterprise was Ireland in the early 1600s. Bushmills, anybody a fan of Bushmills? It's cool. And then eventually, as things went on, just like any spirit when it was in its infancy, it was pretty rough, pretty hot. It didn't taste too great, and they ended up storing it in barrels just to kind of, store it. And they found out, well, these barrels really take that nasty edge off. And so that's kind of where barreling came into the whole picture today. And in all actuality, rum was actually America's first spirit, especially up in the New England area. But the spirit that everybody knows and loves today is particularly bourbon and then rye. So those are really the more American spirits, so to speak. But that actually became an early form of currency back in the day. And George Washington actually had his own distillery, Mount Vernon. You can find these bottles floating around. It's he pretty much made rye for the most part. And this particular bottle here says bottled in bond, which is interesting. We're going to talk a little bit about that in just a short while. Okay, so we'll start with Scotch. I know it's not everybody's jam, but you know, historically, they're kind of the first step we got to take. Now, interestingly, even though it's a small island, there's a lot of regions where they have kind of distinct flavor characteristics coming about in their finished spirits, and they are not quickly adherent to any kind of like specific kind of mash bills. It's usually going to be like 10-20% malt, and then they can kind of fill in those other gaps the way they please. But there are other things that they need to adhere to. Everything will be aged in oak. They can actually use used barrels, which American distillers really can't. So say we make bourbon, we can't use that barrel again. We send it to Scotland, it will be used to age Scotch. So a lot of our favorite Scotches actually spend some time in American barrels.
Why can we not?
It's just one of those stringencies that they place on it.
To name it what you name it?
Yeah, so basically you get that aging process out of one barrel, and you can use it again for a spirit. You can give it to someone else, like brewers use them to age beer, or you know, absorb that kind of spirit characteristic in like a high gravity beer. Tequila distillers use them. We just can't. So yeah, I guess they feel that just those flavor characteristics that you get out of that wood can only come out once. So yeah, so these guys can use our barrels. Has to be at least 3 years, but if you've ever looked at Scotch labels, you see that often it's going way up to like 12 years, sometimes longer. It's a country where like a 8 to 10 year whiskey is considered young. So every label you see will show the guaranteed age statement of the youngest spirit in that bottle. Some of these distillers will actually use malt that is smoked with peat, which is like a mixture of molasses and stuff, and that's what kind of gives it that character that a lot of people don't like. Kind of iodine-y, some people say it tastes like a Band-Aid. So I mean that's kind of a specific group's jam. Because of that intensity, especially in like tiki drinks or something, you will often see these just as rinses. So they literally just coat the glass. They'll take a little perfume bottle, an atomizer, and just do 3 sprays on it. And that just gives it kind of like a more of an aromatic than a flavor impact. But you can use base spirits from other regions that are a little less aggressive. But they can do up to 20 distillations. Basically, that first one is what you call a stripping run. It's where you just get that spirit pulled off, and then when you distill it again, that's when you're increasing the alcohol, kind of concentrating those good flavors together. Those would be called spirit runs at that point. What you're going to find is that the Scottish whiskeys in particular, you will either see like single malts or blends. So these many producers that are represented up here could be producing a number of different products, and those could be combined into blends that take, 10, 20, 30 different single malts into one blend. I think Chivas Regal did one called Century. It had 100 different single malts. Yeah, go crazy. Personally, I like single malts myself. I like tasting that one distiller's art in one expression. That's just me. There are good blends out there. We're actually going to use one tonight. So, not that better renowned, but a very good Scotch. This will be in drink number 2. All right, so I won't bore you with the details on this particular slide. This just kind of gives you a bird's eye view of the Scotch regions and what those areas tend to produce flavor-wise. So these little tiny regions that are mostly surrounded by the sea, that's where you're gonna get your really salty, peaty kind of spirits. Particularly Ely down here, that little tiny island. That's where you always get your really weird stuff. Seaweed, brine, carbolic soap. I mean, I'm working on it. I'm kind of leaning into Ely, but personally, I like the Highland. If you look up there, it's got really kind of interesting, more intense flavors. And those guys are like really into interesting kind of barrelings. They use like Madeira barrels, other kind of fortified wine barrels to give it a little more interesting aspect. But this just kind of gives you an idea of where those places are and what their spirits tend to taste like. All right, so Irish whiskey. I, like many, had a contentious relationship with Irish whiskey for quite a while. Mainly because for the longest time, there were just 3 main distillers producing stuff from that country, and they all had good stuff. I mean, Jameson, I like everything Jameson makes except Jameson. Black barrel's great, everything. I digress. But anyway, they have a few parallels in the production of Scotch, and sometimes you will get actual flavor components that are very similar too. Because of that, they have to distill at least 3 times from select grains, and they will also have to use oak casks. Wow, okay, yeah, so they're kind of along the same lines in terms of aging periods in Scotland too. So you'll see a lot of 12-year coming out of Ireland. So actually, you'll see a lot of like pure pot still stuff coming out of Ireland. They're really, the little guys out there are really proud of that kind of pot still tradition. Some of them use peat, not very common. But now there is a lot of cane producers making really interesting stuff. There used to be, as I mentioned, 3, now there's like 35 distillers there. Teeling here in particular is really interesting. Really smooth and tasty. They're actually using rum barrels for part of their aging. Another one called Sexton just came out. It's aged in sherry barrels, really good stuff. So I would encourage you to try the little guys as much as you can. All right, so I hear some glasses coming through. That means we're really timing this slide well. So a little bit about this one. One of ours I mentioned is kind of a close relative of the Eastern Sour, which was one of Trader Vic's drinks. When he opened his London location in 1963, he wanted to have a drink that was specific to each location. So when he opened the London one, he was like, let's do something for the British Isles. Do a little Scotch. So at the time it was Dewar's. I had, when I went to that location, it was very good. Personally, I think the Scotch we get tonight is much better. So this, I'll let Kyle talk a little more about it later. This one is actually a blend, but it's all Highland distilled spirits. Really nice and smooth, kind of blonde in color. It's actually the only blended Scotch I keep in my house. But it's a really kind of nice blend, like if you like Montage, I think you'll ease into this pretty well. And because that Scotch is really agreeable, I'm hoping you like it. All right, well, let's go straight into the hot topic, bourbon. It's on everybody's minds today. This is definitely the spirit of the moment. It used to be Scotch, now everybody wants bourbon. People are fighting over Buffalo Trace and blah, blah, blah. If you like the spirit, you definitely know the pain of living in Ohio. There's a lot of misnomers to kind of dispel about bourbon straight away. So, for some reason, there's this conception that all whiskeys are bourbon, and it's not actually that, it's flip. All bourbons are whiskeys. Bourbon just happens to be pretty much America's heritage style of whiskey. If you go to Kentucky, you go to the Bourbon Trail, all those distillers will probably tell you you can only make it in Kentucky, which is a total lie. You can make it anywhere in the continental U.S.
But they'll fight you on that.
Yeah, they will. Yes, for example, the bourbon we're having tonight comes from Indiana. So, yeah, but the constraints around that, other than the continental 48 states, it has to be made with at least 51% corn in the mash bill. They can fill in those gaps with rye, wheat, whatever you want to fill in those gaps with. It has to be aged in new, charred American oak barrels. And as I mentioned, those usually get shipped to other distillers to reuse. And then when they distill it, they go only as high as 125 proof. You kind of cut it there. And then you can actually dilute it down to 40 proof once you are ready to take it from that barrel in the aging process and put it in a bottle. Those are really just the main kind of constraints around it. There's no minimum age. I've seen it as young as 2 or 3 years. It's a little rough, but I think most of the stuff you'll see out there, usually at least 4 years in a barrel.
If you made something like that with 50% corn or in a different barrel in the United States, what would you call it? Whiskey?
Yeah, in case I have to call it American whiskey.
Okay.
And, I mean, other countries could actually do exactly these things, but they can't call it bourbon. The U.S. government won't let them.
Wow.
Yeah. So actually a lot of rum producers, like especially in the Caribbean, will actually use bourbon barrels to age their rum. So that kind of gives you an idea of why bourbon in particular can play really well in place of rum in certain drinks. Now because it's mostly corn, which is a sweeter grain, it's usually going to lean a little bit sweeter, depending on what they balance it out with. So say you fill that other 49% with rye, it's going to be very spicy. If you use wheat, so like Maker's Mark, Weller, those are what they call wheated bourbons. Wheat will give it kind of a natural cereal flavor, like nice and smooth. Again, a little bit sweet, which is probably tells you why Maker's Mark and Weller are so incredibly popular right now. There are a few examples. 100% wheat whiskeys on the market too. I really like it personally because I like that sweet natural cereal taste. I think Woodford's making one right now. They just can't call it bourbon. It would be called a wheat whiskey. And then you, as I mentioned, you have your high rye bourbons. Redemption makes one just to kind of give you a flavor of how that mash bill balance affects the final spirit. As we're going to talk very soon about rye, a lot of people don't like rye because of that spicy kind of bite that it has. Say you make a rye with as much corn as you're allowed, and as little rye as possible, bourbon drinkers can tend to like it, even though it has that weird kind of very close balance. So just to give you an idea how that grain bill kind of affects the spirit. All right, so right into rye. So again, a very American spirit. A lot of parameters just kind of mirror there with bourbon. We actually have at least 51% rye in that mash bill. They have the same kind of barrel constraints, brand new charred American oak barrels. They can distill at a higher proof. They can go up to 160. But again, you're gonna end up with a more spicy kind of biting spirit. If you've ever tasted rye, like rye bread, gives you an idea why that spirit has kind of a bite to it. A lot of the ones on the market are what you call a 95-5. So they do 95% rye and then 5% of just a touch of something else. I don't know, does this fit that?
Yes, it's 95% rye, 5% malted barley.
Okay. So I personally like rye. If you don't like rye, you can get something that kind of dials back that kind of spicy edge. And it does have kind of a drier taste typically too, just because of that grain. And if they're aged for a short period, they tend to be, this applies to both bourbon and rye, they tend to be what you express as hot. It's almost like an alcohol burn, but it's the young spirit too. It kind of impacts that flavor. It'll be a little more grassy, a little more earthy than sweet. Longer it spends in a barrel, it kind of softens it up, sweetens it. All right. Now this is really interesting to me. If anybody has ever seen a few bottles up on the whiskey shelf at the store, it will say bottled in pond or bonded. So that goes back to the early popularity, particularly of bourbon. The same thing actually happened with rye too. But because those spirits became so enormously popular and demand went up, there were a lot of distillers just producing inferior spirit, mislabeling it, saying, hey, this is bourbon, this is rye, when they couldn't really effectively do that. So they came up with this whole kind of federal bonding thing to be a Band-Aid for that. So basically you would have a US agent on your property overseeing this, and the constraints around what was bottled and bond, one of the key things, it was 100 proof. So if you see something 100 proof, that doesn't necessarily mean it's bonded, and we'll have to say that on a label. So it has to come from one distillation season, so which is typically January to June or July through December. It will have to be aged at least 4 years, bottled at 100 proof or 50% alcohol, and it can only be the product of one distiller. So this was it was basically kind of a quality assurance for people who were buying spirit.
It says one distillation season. Does that mean distill it only once or as many times as you want in that time?
Good question. So again, there are various distillation stages, like your stripping run and then your spirit runs. That would all have to happen within that same season. So again, you're assured to be getting same distillation spirit from that period. It's basically just assuring that they weren't making stuff this season and then blending into stuff from another season. It's just kind of a consistency thing. Yeah, I thought it was kind of interesting. There is actually one distiller very close to us, Tom's Foolery, and they're producing regular bourbon and rye and also bonded. I don't think they have a government agent on site, but they're meeting all the other criteria so they can say that it's bonded. All right. So anybody in the room have White Dog, unaged whiskey? Yeah. It tends to be a little rough if we're completely truthful. Moonshine technically would be the stuff made in a beat up green copper still out in the backwoods and drinking that stuff that makes you go blind. But again, now we have commercial distillers that are really churning out a ton of what they label as moonshine. It's basically just unaged whiskey, usually just corn whiskey. Now, they're usually cheap. They're infused with something that's a flavoring agent, and that's kind of why they, have someone in the store that's really pretty, kind of serving you samples. It's not going to be, your high-end spirit, but it does have its place in whiskey history. There are actually a handful that make some interesting stuff. I actually very deliberately put still X up here because a friend convinced me that, I guess the rep kind of got to him and he's like, okay, I'll try it. And he actually used it in some tiki drinks and he says, it works really well. So, everything has its place. I like this kind of clever design too, this kind of oil can thing. Be that as it may, I tend to avoid moonshine. Coincidentally, Middle West Spirits, formerly OYO down in Columbus, does an unaged rye. It's a little rough to drink straight, but it's really, really good cocktail. So it's just kind of neat that people are kind of recognizing that heritage, trying to do it right. All right. Don't like to talk a whole lot about Canadian whiskey because I don't get on with it well at all. But they basically have the least kind of constraint around what they have to do to produce that whiskey. And again, there are good examples in everything. But most often, they're going to be made with rye. It can actually be made with almost 10% of imported spirit, which probably is just neutral grain spirit. Any of these huge producers, mostly concentrated like a Windsor, they make a huge volume, and that's why it's so cheap. But again, if you look to the little distillers, more interesting, lesser known, they produce some good stuff. So in particular, Pine Creek up here is very tasty. I think it's a pretty decently high age statement on that, and they actually age in a rum barrel, so it tastes really pretty sweet and exceptional. This one here, Good Remember Once, I brought back from Canada, specifically because it had some real character. It's a 4-grain whiskey, little distiller in the Toronto area. The other ones up here are okay. Oddly enough, 40, this tall one, has their own branded tiki mug. I don't know why. So I guess if you want to get into a tiki bar, you make a mug and then you have to use the spirit too. But anyway, but it has to be bottled at a minimum of 80 proof, so it's going to be pretty high strength. No maximum limit on the distillation proof. I mean, it's, I don't know, by and large, not a fan, but again, there are good examples out there. There is a book out there called Canadian Cocktails. It's honestly really good. Bought it in Canada, they did it on Amazon. So just a little food for thought. So we can't really talk about whiskey without at least touching on Prohibition. Had a huge impact on the spirit in this country for a very long time. Basically took what you consider, safe whiskey off the menu. All those distillers basically just got shuttered. So any whiskey coming in basically was being smuggled over the border from Canada, which meant you had a lot of Canadian whiskey coming in. It almost killed the Irish whiskey industry. So much Irish whiskey was coming into the U.S. From Ireland that they depended on us that much. And so that's why only 3 of those distillers survived. Scotch, similar impact. Huge market here, that got shut off. But there was an interesting little clause that you could keep producing whiskey here if you had a license to do it for prescriptions. So you got your doctor to write you a prescription for whiskey for whatever ailment that would fix. You could actually buy it. So an interesting story. Anybody ever heard of the name George Remus? No, you.
Oh yeah, I'm familiar. I actually just bought the single barrel that came out.
Oh, nice. Okay. Apparently, he was a character in Boardwalk Empire. I didn't get that far in. It's just such a great story. So he came from a family that had quite a big hand in the distilling industry. He actually got that medicinal prescription license, moved everything he owned, like moved all his distillation down to Cincinnati. And even though he had that prescription license, he was able to basically produce enough to send stuff out on the trucking company that he also owned, and be like, okay, cronies, here's the meeting point. I want you to steal some of this stuff and put it out into the bootlegging market. So he basically got to a point where in today's dollars, he was worth $33 million. Yes, became enormously rich. The Prohibition people did actually end up catching up with him, got him in prison, and then they snuck in a Prohibition agent as an inmate who got him to fess up that basically he signed over everything to his wife. This inmate went off, had an affair with his wife.
Oh.
Attempted to get him deported back to Germany. Tried to take all his money and everything, and so while he did his time for the Prohibition. When he got out, he had his driver basically run his wife off the road. He pled not guilty by reason of insanity. Spent a little time in a mental hospital, and then by the time he got out, basically there was just too much criminal element in bootlegging, so it was like, well, I'll be a real estate agent. So, interesting story though. But he's known as the king of bootleggers. There are a number of Remus spirits that Heidelberg carries. They do some repeal editions.
We should probably do one of these.
We probably should.
I would love to do
I
that.
like that.
December 5th, perhaps. All right. Sparkly killed it. All right. But yeah, obviously, once that Prohibition was lifted, all these guys can continue producing again. There are a few other instances around the world of whiskey production. I think the only one that really merits, huge laudability is Japan. They produce amazingly good whiskeys. They're really a lot like kind of modeled after the Scotch aspect and everything they do. Super high quality stuff more often than not, and because of that similarity in the spirit base, they will usually be on the shelf with Scotch. I would not be surprised if the Japanese market grows enough that our stores will have a dedicated Japanese whiskey section. We'll see. Period. But like Centauri and Nikka, which we see here, make really excellent spirits. Usually a little spendy, but very, very good. One thing to mention about Japan is they are actually largely responsible for the rarity of these things that people in this room might covet. So a lot of that Blanton's goes to Japan because Japan will pay enormous sums of money for it. So the reason we're seeing shortages of really coveted bourbons here, great deal if it goes overseas. So really, I think the only other country that kind of merits any kind of, pay for record, I guess, England. They have 6 distilleries, not producing anything mind-blowing. And most other countries are really just kind of dipping their toe in the water. They've really only been into it since the 90s. So there's Swedish whiskey out there. I don't know if it's worth tracking down, but not a lot of faith.
If you start a distillery and you're making, say, a 12-year-old, whatever it is, what do you do for the first 12 years?
That's a really good question. So the distillery, I work for, perfect example. If you are starting as a distillery, you basically have to have a clear spirit on the market first, which is pretty much the toughest to sell because the market is so plentiful with vodka and cordials that aren't aged, things like that. So number one, you have to produce a pretty exceptional clear spirit. Rely on that to just basically get your gears going for your first at least 3-4 years. Make your whiskey first, and then obviously start that aging process, sooner than later. Now, in that interim, you Now, if you're a good distiller, you'll be transparent about this. You can do what they call sourcing. So you reach out to a bigger distiller, say, I want to come in and, our whiskey is ultimately going to be this mash bill. It's going to be aged for this long. So we want to get something in that flavor profile. What do you have? And so they can actually buy spirit, meeting those requirements, and put it in their bottles under their label. So, which is perfectly fine. I have no problem with it as long as it's a good spirit. You're actually making the effort to pick something that's going to resemble what you want to make. Probably the biggest company that does that at the moment is called MGP, Midwest Grain Producers.
Great product.
Products. Okay. They're in Indiana. They're quite big, but they have a vast variety of different mash bills, different ages. So, great example, High West. Awesome urban rye distiller. They're doing their own stuff now, but basically they had to establish their company, and they went to MGP and said, hey, here's what we're going to end up making. Can we source this from you under our label until we actually have our own stuff? So, very good question. So that is really kind of what happens. So that's how Bullet started. A lot of big names they did, just didn't know otherwise. Yeah. So you are going to see a lot of nomenclature with whiskey, and it took me a while to get my head around all these too. So straight just basically means it's coming from a single distillery. It's going to be a single product, but it will not be like a variation in age or anything. It can come from different batches, but it's all got to be the same age. Just one spirit product. Now, blended, you obviously can take different ages, different kinds of spirits, blend them together, but that has to be stated on the label. Single malt, that's a big term for, especially Scotch whiskeys. You can see it on a few American whiskey labels now. So yeah, that's just one specific spirit coming from one producer. Single barrel, so because there are tiny variations in flavor and strength from one barrel to the next, it's kind of a geeky thing to get a single barrel product. So that means you have to find out what that proof is on that individual barrel. And when you buy a bottle of that, they're going to write the number of the barrel on there and the proof. So if you buy a single barrel of something from George T. Stagg, you'll look at one bottle and it'll say barrel number whatever, and then the different number will have a slightly different amount of alcohol in it. So there are going to be just tiny little tinges out there. It's usually going to come out in what they call barrel proof or barrel strength, meaning they didn't dilute it down with purified water. It's just coming in straight out of that barrel at the strength that it barrel. Well, I should say it's actually probably gone down from like 125 usually in the low teens or something. I'm sure you've all heard the term angel share. Some of that alcohol evaporates over the years. Angels can be pretty greedy. The longer you go, the amount that's left in that barrel is fairly staggeringly low. So the place I used to work had a 14-year spirit, and I think they got 19 gallons out of a barrel that was originally 55. So when you get those high age statement whiskeys, that's why that price tag goes way up. But some people really like that super oaky whiskey. On a related note, these terms char and toast, that's talking about the barrel. So there are like levels, I think 1 to 4 of each. Is someone online, correct me if I'm wrong. So char is basically the amount of actual fire charring that they apply to the inside of that barrel. The higher the number, the higher the char. I think you can only go up to that like number 4 before it dries out the barrel too much. So that char, that basically you're forming like a charcoal layer that kind of soaks in any of the negative flavor components that might be in there. And then toast it's weird. It's kind of like I don't know, like a plant-based sugar or something, a layer that forms under the toast. And so that will affect basically how many more sugars are released while you're maturing it, which means, how much sweetness you'll have. So personally, I like a high toast. I like a drier and like a low toast. Yeah. But I did want to kind of obviously talk about whiskey in the tiki realm because that's why we're all here. There is a bit of a misnomer in basically the whiskey world of tiki called Oko Lahau. It's actually a spirit made in Hawaii from the root of the tea plant, tea. So that's how it actually began. There are still a handful of producers out there. That's what it was originally. So during World War II, a lot of Japanese immigration happened. As they came in, a lot of rice production kind of came with that. So basically, people could produce oko lehau with rice or grain, and they were just kind of saying, hey, this is oko lehau. We're going to put it in these fancy tourist sucker bottles, saying it's oko lehau, and everyone at the store will be like, oh, look what I got. So if you do look for it, you got to be really careful to make sure it's an actual producer. Real oko lehau. And don't get me wrong, I've actually sought out these bottles like on eBay. It's like, wow, that's cool. But yeah, the spirit inside wasn't necessarily good. Again, look for the real thing. I actually found someone in California that was bringing it in and hadn't told me, oh, I will let you shoot. So I got a couple bottles of the real thing. It's just kind of an interesting, weird parallel. Like if you go into Beachbone Berry's books and look up these recipes that specify oko lehau, it's like you can't get the real thing, use whiskey. So I don't know if that's just because of that weird kind of substitution thing that was going on historically, but you can kind of sub whiskey in that instance. All right, in just a moment, I'm gonna hand this over to my good friend Kyle to talk about our featured spirit producers tonight. And you might be able to actually win a little something to take home.
Woo! Yeah, absolutely. I'm glad he said that because I totally would have just jumped right in and started talking about it. So I'm just going to go over a couple things about each of the distilleries. Nothing too crazy, just some fun little tips about each one. But once we're all said and done, I'll ask everybody questions. I have some bottles to give away, limoncello and a bourbon here that we are going to be giving to one of you guys, whoever answers the questions right first. And then afterwards, we'll do what we did the last time. I have plenty of spirits over there to sample. I'd love to go around and talk to you guys all about it more in depth. We'll start with Douglas Lang, Timorous Beastie here. This is his. So Douglas Lang, that company started, I want to say back in 2007, 2008. And he was producing his own stuff, and they were like, yeah, this is pretty good. But as Tim touched on, in Scotland, there are 5, arguably 6 different regions. Each region has their own way of doing things and has their own unique flavor profiles that they put into their spirit. Varying amounts of heat, depending on your mash bill. Highland is what this one is based off of. He decided that he was going to source, much like what you were talking to him about, different distilleries from the different regions and blend those spirits together. He has in his mind, one feature of what he considers in his master blenders, who again have a palate that far outdoes mine, to be the ideal blended scotches from each of those regions. This one is their feature for Highland. So this is 100% malted barley in here, 100% Highland Scotch. And this is, in his opinion, what a Highland Scotch should taste like. They have multiple other ones. I am, unlike from what it sounds like, you're not a huge fan of Highland Scotches. I think Highland Scotches are superb. If you're a fan of smoke, if you're a fan of that peaty feel, if you're a fan of the Band-Aids,
Carvel, so.
yeah, that's where you're at. The Islands, which is technically today, legally speaking, they're still part of the Highlands. But much like Hamilton, which is another region of Scotland, they're surrounded by the ocean. So what they tend to do is they have their rat houses, their aging areas near the ocean, and that's where that salinity that you can pick up on. Those are also very good scotches. So I highly recommend, much like what Tim was saying, go out, try something different, do yourself a favor. Honestly, I was very happy when I started tasting these guys. Pretty fantastic. Moving on to the Hotel Tango. So Hotel Tango featured today, of course, because today is Veterans Day. If we have any veterans in here, thank you for your service. We both appreciate it. This company was started by Travis Barnes. He is a 3-tour vet, served in Iraq. Nearing the end time of his 3rd tour, his company, his Humvee was hit by an IED. Honorably sent home. Little bit PTSD, some hearing loss, but other than that, fairly unscathed. So he had been, before he was put overseas, he had been making illegal booze in his backyard as a hobby. So he comes back, he needed something to kind of like get his mind off of things and get himself right. So him and his buddies started doing that again in his backyard. This was while he was going to school to be a lawyer. So after doing this for so long, his one friend's like, man, you know what? This stuff's actually really good. You should see what you can do with it. So he did, and he started Hotel Tango. The NATO phonetic alphabet is the Alpha, Bravo, Charlie, blah, 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 so on down the line. The 2 owners of this company, Hillary and Travis Barnes. Hillary is Travis's wife. The H for Hillary is Hotel. And the T for Travis is Tango, hence the Hotel Tango. They did quite a big rebranding of their product a few years back, put them in these cool little decanter style, or not decanter style, canteen style bottles. They have the labels based off of MREs. So if anybody here has served, it's got the ready to eat or ready to drink on there instead of ready to eat. This side up to pour, this side down to store. Clever little concepts like that, but it did well for them because once they switched over to these bottles, they just started flying off the shelves. The other cool thing that they changed up, I don't know if they show it on any of the specific bottles other than down on the bottoms. Yeah, they don't have it on the front, which I think it should. It's kind of a cool story. So Travis served as a recon troop over in Iraq. And the call signs that they would pick up from the insurgents there were, they referred to them as the Black Diamonds. And that was because they had night vision goggles, and the way that the night vision goggles were set up, it looked like a black diamond in the middle of these lights. And they're notorious for saying, don't mess with the Black Diamonds. Obviously, they, had learned not to go after American military the hard way once or twice. So they're like, okay, you see the Black Diamonds off in the distance, turn around and go the other way. We're not trying to mess with them. So he put the Black Diamond on there as a fun little callback to what he did while he served. You were talking also about sourcing. So their 6-year was sourced. It's a blend of George Tickle and MGP, so Midwest Grain Products. They did not tell me the exact blend. That's a proprietary blend of theirs. I get it. I'm not gonna rat them out for wanting to keep their company secrets. That being said, their 2-year is very unique. They like for me not to tell you that it's 2-year until after people taste it. Typically, a 2-year whiskey, as he was saying, does come across very young, has a little bit of a bite to it. This, on the other hand, does not. A lot of mash bills tend to have 3-grain mash bill to them. So you're looking at your typical so many percentage of corn. You might throw in some wheat in there, and then you got your barley to get it going. This is corn, rye, barley, and wheat. So it's a 4 grain. That, and the way that they age it, takes away a lot of that youth out of it and adds a very nice smoothness to it. So it does great in cocktails, does great on the rocks. I have no issue throwing that on some ice cubes when I get home and sipping from it. 6 years, definitely much more for that one, of course, but both excellent choices. So that's basically the gist of our 2 spirits here, 3 spirits that we're using. I already went over the rye that is 95% rye. That one is also theirs, not sourced. So you should be able to expect to see their juice in the bottles for the 6 years. They said anywhere between 4 to 4.5 years from now. So keep an eye out for it. Guys, thanks for letting me take up some of your time. Thanks again to Tim and Tiki Underground. Do you want to do that now? You don't want to, yeah?
It's up to you.
I don't care. Yeah, okay.
We want the raffle now? What do we think?
Yeah, that's fine. Well, it's still fresh in everybody's head. I get it.
Yeah.
Okay, so first one. What is the alphabet called that military uses?
Native phonetic.
Native phonetic, beautiful.
Wow.
Tango, the limoncello, or the bourbon?
Bourbon.
Bourbon, beautiful.
All right.
Let me throw this back
Good, I got it.
out.
take it.
You got it? Awesome, thanks. That is, yeah,
This
this
is
is
bourbon
all
on it?
his, yep. Hotel Tango stands for
Heather and Travis. Hillary.
Hillary and Travis. Yes, there you go.
There's.
All right, everybody, thanks again. I'll be around afterwards. We'll try a bunch of good stuff and go over any other questions that you might have.
There's a whole lot of spirits over there, and some swag.
Oh yeah, if anybody wants any extra koozies to take home to a loved one, sunglasses, stickers, whatever it might be, we have plenty. Please help yourselves. Thank you. Thank you.
Thank you.
And just as a side note, I'd like to just put it out there, these are spirits I've actually went out and sought and bought retail to have at home. I wouldn't put anything up here that I wasn't, 100% behind, so I'm happy that they're helping us out.
You're such a sweet talker.
I'm with Tim, seal of approval. All right, so we're nearing the home stretch here. Your final drink tonight is actually the rye tie, which will be on the future menu. It can be right now. So basically, this is a Trader Vic build in every respect except the base spirit. So we're using the Hotel Tango rye. There is there's between all the drinks in front of us tonight, there is 1 ounce of blackstrap rum kind of dabbled in to all these drinks, just to kind of give it a little bit of robust sweetness. I kind of developed that habit because Basil Hayden put out a rum finished rye with blackstrap in it, and I fell so deeply in love with it, and then they took it off the market. So, but honestly, I love this build. I love it with straight rye. And again, it just shows you what an amazingly versatile cocktail Mai Tai is. I've probably told everybody 1,000 times that I used to get asked what's your favorite cocktail, and I couldn't answer it because there's just so many great ones in history. Now I can confidently say it's the Mai Tai because you can do so much with it. So, and again, you need to bear in mind that a lot of rums are aged in American whiskey barrels, so that kind of gives you a little bit of that flavor transition if you switch that spirit. All right. Just a little bit of finishing thoughts about whiskey as we kind of near the end. There are some interesting trends going on today. One that I'm very, very fond of is the secondary barrel aging. So as long as, for example, a bourbon meets those original constraints, they meet that mash bill, put it into a new charred American oak barrel for however long, there's nothing that says you can't take that and transfer it into another barrel. So in particular, like Angel's Envy, A lot of other good spirit producers are doing that, so you can get something that's got some secondary time in a sherry barrel, or even port. I mean, all these really interesting things. It's just something fun to look for, and it's really gonna give you a bigger palette for cocktails. A big, again, as I mentioned before, Highland scotches especially, it's been a huge trend with like Glenmorangie for the longest time. You can get their range in like sherry barrel aging, Madeira, port. It just goes on and on and on, and they all taste wonderful. Some producers are actually taking some finished whiskey spirits and blending it a tiny bit with something else. So again, Basil Hayden did it with Blackstrap rum. They did it with port. Purists might feel that's a little bit funky. I don't really have a problem with it. Actually, there's a Columbus producer that's doing one called Midnight Cask. It's, again, a little bit of port, just tastes absolutely wonderful. A few people are doing like infusions, and they can still call that spirit like a bourbon if they do everything that is required beforehand, and then maybe do some kind of flavor infusion after the fact. They don't have to say, you know, like such and such infused bourbon. When they're making it, they can't introduce any of those elements into the process called bourbon.
But what fits in infusion?
So if you're doing it properly, it's an utterly simple process. I do it all the time. I'll get like a clear rum, and if I want to do like an orange peel infusion or something, it's literally just taking a natural peel, letting it rest in spirit for a certain amount of time until it tastes proper, and then you have your infused spirit. That's really all it is, like steeping. That is, you know, not the same thing as a monstrous vodka producer taking watermelon chemical and just going every bottle. Very different thing. So,
Not to cut him off,
Can't
that's a
stress
big
that.
reason why I've always stressed to people, flavored vodka,
yeah,
better off doing it yourself.
yes, yeah. I know you can't get it here. There is a spirit producer. Their line is called Infused, and they're basically producing just neutral spirit. And you buy the bottle, and if it's orange, you have orange peels in the bottle. It's pretty ingenious, and it tastes good. So it's done right. But I'm going off track. Sorry. And then now, as I mentioned, bourbon barrels, rye barrels, they're going into use with other spirits, obviously, but even wine producers. Now, that's a pretty big trend. Like you're getting a red wine that's aged in a bourbon barrel. Cooper and Thief is one of those producers that's really big on that. It's usually, honestly, pretty affordable, like in the low 20s, unless you get the Cooper and Thief rye barrel aged red, which is $60 a bottle. I'm sitting on it. I really hope it's worth it. But anyway. And of course, I do like to throw one slide up there. And again, if you want me to email you this deck, I can send a PDF. My card is right here with my email on it. So just send me a message. Happy to send it. It's either I'm taking pictures of this or whatever. I just like to throw a few of the things up there that I respect at a good price. So this is just kind of an overview of each of those main spirit categories we put up tonight. I forgot to put Canadian up there, but
Yeah, forgot.
sorry, Canada. Real socialized medicine. Yes, some of these I'm really trying to get back on our back bar, especially like with Russell's Reserve 10. That's superb for the price, 10 years. So just a few ideas if you're looking to play around at home. And of course, you know, I needed to touch on whiskey's role in what we do. Obviously, you know, that whole time when Tiki was developing was just hot on the heels of Prohibition. So, you know, whiskey, gin, all those things that the kind of jet setting class like drink, it just disappeared. So if you could get rum, it would be, however it made it up into the country by way of rum runners or bootleggers. It actually had a seal on it. It was, a safe spirit, well produced. And that just kind of made it an easier inroad to get into Tiki. But again, as I said, since so many of these are aged in, whiskey barrels, there are some kind of parallels there. So there are a few that were, really just built on whiskey to begin with. If you get peach rum berries with Tiki, I think that at this point, there were 37. I did just get an update, so it might have gone up a notch. And some of these really classic drinks, like the Port Light from Columbus, Tiki. If someone wants a whiskey drink here, I really stress that they should get it, and everyone loves it. So, and yeah, it's basically one of those things where you're either drinking the kind of stylish spirits, the whole speakeasy cocktail culture, or whether you're kind of getting into Tiki. A lot of these bars did kind of try to get those spirits mixed in with the rum drinks just to kind of bring more people into the fold. And I did have some results, not a whole lot in the past, but now today that this has become a resurgence. Mixology creativity is just huge among the bartender community, so a lot of this stuff is kind of making a comeback, and a lot of really intelligent bartenders are doing a lot of riffs on like classic drinks, like let's do a whiskey-based zombie, things like that, just kind of mix up the flavor a bit. Yeah, and this is just kind of restating what I just said. Why, those intermingling of spirits was just really kind of low with that. And again, in all honesty, rum does give you more of a kind of blending aspect that isn't necessarily possible with other kind of spirit categories. You can take rums from 3 different islands that have really specific kind of flavor characteristics and put it in a 1934 zombie. That's going to be amazing. Where with whiskey, you're not really going to see that. And again, whiskey, if you're constantly talking whiskey that's had a decent aging period on it, it's going to be more cost prohibitive. So rum is less cost to produce. They're getting those barrels a lot cheaper, so they're getting that kind of whiskey influence in it, but it's going to cost you less. But going back to that slide I put up a couple minutes ago, there are good, like really good whiskeys that you can not have to break your bank to get, and it could be really fun to play with in a Tiki drink. All right, kind of getting back to that thing I mentioned about modern day mixologists. If you go online, you can really find a lot out there, and these are actually all hot links. So if I send you the deck, you can actually click on these links and check them out. These are all just really good examples of some creative bartenders that have taken staples from the Tiki world and put a whiskey riff on them. So yeah, a lot of fun things to play with if you have a decent selection of stuff at your house. And there are a lot of elements in the cocktails that we make here. Some not necessarily alcoholic, some cordials, things like that. They play nearly as well or equally well in a whiskey drink as they would with rum. So just a few things up here. Citrus for sure, lemon, grapefruit in particular. A lot of these sours are kind of based on those citrus elements. Cinnamon, clove, all those kind of obvious things that are going to play nice with a warm aged spirit. Passion fruit and grenadine, both going in the Port Light, play together wonderfully. And of course like orange cherry cordials, and these craft syrups, they just work wonderfully well with whiskeys. So just things to think about if you're going to get creative. These are just a handful of other ones. We actually did a Roman twist here for our anniversary. It actually works really well if you use like a really nice strong cold brew instead of like a cloyingly sweet Tia Maria or something like that. So these are just kind of across the decades. Port Light, obviously, Western Sour. These two here are actually more like new school. The Polynesian brevity, honestly, the only aspect of it is the literally 3 dashes of Elay Scotch. But again, that flavor is so intense, you just got to rinse the glass. And you're going to know it's there. All right, so that is the final slide. I do always just like to give you some reading material ideas. If you can get all of these at the library and you'll just end up buying them anyway. So I have a handful of them here if you're interested in kind of leafing through them. The Curious Bartender, he's this British guy. He's writing really deeply detailed books. So it's just kind of a nerd out thing. And Michael Jackson, he wasn't the guy we love. He was a British guy. He's unfortunately no longer with us. He wrote many good books, whiskey, especially Scotch, which was his favorite spirit. If you ever had the pleasure of meeting him, he had a craft beer in one hand and a snifter of Scotch in the other. And I think his hands were permanently frozen. All right, so any questions? I'm going to mingle around anyway, and I'll steal some more samples from Kyle.
We got plenty.
Have a little break in my own.
I thought that the reason that we have so many microbreweries and micro wineries and micro distilleries is just getting rid of blue laws. But it doesn't sound like it because you're talking about Japan. I mean, is it technology filtering down or what is happening?
Well, it's kind of a very latent effect of prohibition no longer being with us. I mean, both breweries and distilleries alike were highly localized before prohibition. And so when all of those went out of business, how many years was that? 14, 15 years that was taken away from our country. And so everybody kind of forgot about it. All those places got shuttered up. And when that got taken away, big producers like Budweiser and everything, especially in the war like that, they were about the only game in town. So only now is it kind of coming back to that whole thing, like, it was basically immigrants who were occupying, certain pockets of the country. It's like, we want to make our German beer for our area here. We want to distill this over here. And that's all kind of coming back. Perfect example, like, you go to Minnesota, there's tons of little distilleries around there. And if anybody ever heard of Aquavit, Scandinavian spirit, love it. It's made with caraway, so you get this really kind of spicy rye bread kind of taste to it. It's since it's so big with Scandinavia, there's like 10 distillers making Aquavit up in Minnesota. And we're never going to see it here, but so it's just kind of that whole idea coming back to life.
So we had one comment online about grenadine and how important it is to have good quality grenadine.
Yes.
So I don't know if you have any comments you want to share on that. I know you have an opinion about that. So.
Yeah, I do. Don't get roses. If you want to spend the money on a craft producer's grenadine, you can. As long as you make a really good, rich, simple syrup yourself, do a 50-50 blend with really just good natural pomegranate juice, like even Palm Wonderful, and maybe like a cap of rose water. Tastes wonderful. You can make it yourself really cheap. And Yeah, excellent point.
Has anyone else tried to make their own grenadine? Yeah, very good. Not too bad, right? So-
Oh,
It's easy and it's delicious.
Yeah.
Just reduce it down.
I thought you just needed sugar, water, and red fruit powder. I'll export myself.
I love it.
All right, cool. Well, just one last thing, I totally forgot to do this. Every time I do this thing where I talk about making cocktails, I always stress the Boston shaker is so much better. All the drinks we demoed tonight are shaken drinks, so good equipment is part of this, and you can get these sets really cheap on Amazon. 18 ounces, 28 ounces. Better seal, yeah, you know the drill, you've heard me say it, so I mean, anyway. Boston shaker, Copland.
Very good.
I need
Thank
a
you.
drink.
All right.
You're in the right place.